Your first take on the announcement of Pat Gelsinger retiring, were you surprised?
I was very surprised by the abrupt news, like retiring today with no transition period, so a difficult situation. We knew the board was tense since the summer. You remember Tan, the CEO of Cadence, resigned from the board over the summer, and it was like reflecting like difficult conversations. And so it probably looks like Pat lost the confidence of the board, or didn't get the support of the board for his strategy anymore, and basically probably decided to leave abruptly. So that was a surprise. Now that we are 4 years into the turnaround, Pat's direction was let's double down on Intel's capabilities in manufacturing. Let's make Intel like a leading manufacturer. Let's go large. Go big, and leverage at the maximum the political support we'll have to do that. So that was the plan, and the plan failed basically because TSMC's model cannot be competed against. I think that's the view we've had from the beginning. So Intel being able to preserve manufacturing capabilities, yes. Intel being like a scalable, like a large-scale competitor to TSMC. Is probably not possible for like scale and experience reasons, and that's where things failed.
Yeah, in August, on that very bleak announcement of numbers that we had, and a disastrous sell-off in the shares, was this restructuring. It involved a lot of job losses, but it did involve also the sort of peeling away of the foundry business to be able to be managed sort of separately but alongside Intel. Does that stay, or do we start to see actual purchasing coming from, well, with the reports previously of Qualcomm being interested, even the chip designer arm?
So the situation is going to be very, very fluid for quite some time, for sure. As you mentioned last summer, the board was said to be fighting off, activist shareholder, or at least getting prepared to fight off activist moves. The situation is, of course, very complex. So on one hand, Intel has manufacturing capabilities. Intel has manufacturing capabilities onshore, and owned by like a US controlled company. So it's a very, very unique asset, extremely valuable in today's geopolitical context. And I think Intel needs to continue to be able to build on that. So of course there is a tempting route, which is to say, okay, maybe Qualcomm and Intel could merge, or Qualcomm could buy out Intel, or try and trigger a consolidation of that type. I don't see that as a good opportunity. It's very difficult to generate synergies between Qualcomm and Intel. The chips Qualcomm do are very different from the Intel chips. Manufacturing is a complex business. So I'm not super, that's an area that scares me more than anything else. Bad M&A decisions typically can arrive in a situation like that. Yeah. What's more interesting, I think, is to be like, okay, how can we make sure we create a sustainable US-owned, on US soil manufacturing capability? And if you do that, you have probably to admit that you're not going to compete with TSMC. You need to partner with TSMC.
Right.
Maybe you need to find other very large partners that are going to support you. And of course, the one that comes to mind that owes maybe to the US is NVIDIA. So, like intelligent partnering around manufacturing with TSMC as a partner, NVIDIA as a partner, would be a much more interesting route to pursue from here.
There is ongoing breaking news around this story, and Bloomberg leading the charge with how Pat Gelsinger was indeed forced out after the board grew frustrated. The biggest frustration, Pierre, was that they missed the AI evolution, jumping on and being able to ensure that what they produced, which is Gaudi, was able to compete. I mean, they're likely to miss that $500 million target for this year when NVIDIA's busy making about $100 billion a year.
Yeah, I think it's the frustration came from the lack of prudence of the initial plan, going too big, too large, assuming demand would follow as long as you can pull together like quality supply. And yes, the underlying cause is that Intel ended up not being in the growing part of the market, and namely AI. It was last summer was particularly abrupt, like to see like the the complete failure of Intel's AI chips and the fact that they would not be at all in the market, while AMD is actually carving out a fairly sustainable niche positioning in that market. So that was part of it. But I think Pat probably stuck too much to his initial plan with like a very ambitious, very large scale plan, and should have probably a year or 18 months ago thought about changing tack to smaller and more collaborative with other players in the market.
Because Pierre, I mean, much of this predated the Pat coming back in 2021. That course was already kind of paved, and he didn't reorientate quickly enough. Where now, in terms of leadership and in terms of Intel's place in the ecosystem? Very quickly, please.
So I think Intel could be specialized in manufacturing in the US under US control and ownership, and collaborate with the rest of the industry instead of competing. I think then like smaller scale, remaining keeping a position at the leading edge and leveraging the products of Intel, like the PC chips and the server chips that are still very good and in very high demand.